Comedy. Comedy is something that comes almost directly with every animated movie just because animation allows us to explore gags and comedic ideas all from the dome. Timing, increased facial expressions, and exaggerations has made animated movies the perfect candidates for almost having comedy play some sort of role, even if the movie ends up getting emotional or deep. Again, that is generalizing. There's some animated movies that can just be depressing, and that's it. But as for 3D, DreamWorks, Sony, Pixar, etc. movies, you almost right off the bat expect some sort of humor, whether it's on the nose and aimed for kids, or it takes a more creative route that makes almost everyone go, "This is really smart. This is clever. Why does this work so well?" But that being said, it's also hard for animated movies to balance humor in a way that feels more part of the full story and not just filler. Because when a movie falls flat in everything else, the comedy, no matter how good it is, gets kind of shortened to just being fluff. And it's only when a movie can filter the comedy in with the rest of the plot and message that it feels meant to be and everything comes together. I had this exact thought after seeing the recent Kung Fu Panda installment, where I felt that the comedy was just as good as the rest of the other Kung Fu Pandas, but that I couldn't give it any credit for that because the rest of the movie did not have enough of other good aspects to make the gags feel complimentable. I don't know if that's a word. I don't even know if any of this makes sense. But I realized even deeper that comedy can backfire for any movie when that's the only thing that's good. And that leads me to the topic of today's video, which is about Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and how I think it mastered the mix of comedy into an overall story. And I'm also going to talk about the second one and how it doesn't do that. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs came out during almost the start of 3D animated movies becoming more unexpectedly creative, not to be confused with regular creative. I'm talking about animated movies that started embracing weirdness and came up with ideas that wouldn't seem to make a full movie, but did and actually worked. It's no surprise that the directors of this movie, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, also went on to do this the most with the Lego Movie. It's the genre of animated movies I like to call, you know, that probably shouldn't have worked as anything more than a short film, but it did. And we're seeing that even more now with the Barbie movie and Hollywood realizing that they can do movies on the silliest of ideas and brands and make it work. But this all comes back to the masterpiece, which is this movie being loosely based on a book about an old guy telling the story of a town he lived in that would rain food for every meal. And they took that idea and they made a whole universe. The movie stars Flint Lockwood, voiced by Bill Hader, who I need to hear back in animated movies because this guy was at one point working overtime, and I can't think of a better casting choice. Flint Lockwood is this oddball inventor, and the movie paints him as someone who is not doing good outside of this whatsoever. His dad wants him to work at the tackle store he owns, and has kind of gotten a bit tired of Flint's inventions. Whoever came up with this character design, I hope they're having the best life ever. And as a child, Flint's inventions seem to never go right, but I disagree with how this opener paints him, because if this kid showed up to my school in real life, I would think he's a genius. You're telling me these kids see this other kid literally spray shoes onto his feet, and the one thing they're thinking of is, how's he gonna get those off? No, this is revolutionary. Thomas Edison is right in front of you. We then get an older Flint Lockwood who has now started working on his best project ever, the Flim's Deverbur, which is supposed to put a stop to the problem on the island Swallow Falls, Flint's hometown, which the people of have now become stuck with eating the world's sardines. We get an introduction to the literal humor this movie does best, and it gets me every time.
Right after everyone in the world realized that sardines are super gross.
And we also get an introduction to the overly dramatic scenes that I love this movie for. You take this character who is so funny looking and goofy without trying, and make him overly confident and serious. And then right after that, you gotta hit the audience with an abrupt cut to the characters no longer being serious. A classic. Perfect. It's why I love the Lego Movie. The Lego Movie's humor worked so well because they realized how unserious a movie about Lego is and made that fact ingrained with everything by making the characters act really serious despite not being serious at all. And it works so well because it instantly separates the jokes from just being a one and done situation. Without the jokes and gags in the Lego Movie, you wouldn't have the Lego Movie because they are the driving factor for everything plot-wise. And it's also what makes Cloudy with with a Chance of Meatballs work so well. A movie about a guy who wants to make food rain from the sky is obviously inherently silly, and that's of course the motivation to make this movie in the first place. But that gives them the playing ground and the basis for writing the humor. They can build the world and the story off of the silliness, and because of this, the impact is even better when they hit you with something unexpectedly emotional or personal. What a lot of Phil Lord and Chris Miller animated movies do that I think separates them from regular animated movie comedy is the self-parodying. If you really think of it, it plays a part in all their animated movies, and somehow doing this makes the story more believable because it allows itself to be self-aware and fully takes the bizarreness in. Like, if your movie is gonna be random and chaotic, acknowledging it and using that fact to its full potential will do so much more. Flint is running around his headquarters just being the silliest guy. We got his monkey Steve, who has a translator that also becomes a set-in-stone comedy placement. There's a ton of bits this movie starts in the beginning and then calls back to, something I always appreciate in animated comedies. There is so much potential payoff when you set up a joke early and throw back to it later on. One of the best examples is the spray-on shoes still being on Flint's feet later in this movie. Perfect. They really could have forgot about that and not mentioned it again. That could have just been a funny bit in the beginning, but no, they chose to use it to then add another joke, further amplifying the realness of this world. Kind of off topic, but an even more recent example of animation that does callbacks so well that comes to mind has got to be Smiling Friends. Just like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, it does such a good job of later adding on to a quick bit established earlier in the episode, and it just adds so much. Like, you don't even realize it was needed, but then when it happens, you're like, yep, that's perfect. That just wraps up this episode in a neat bow even more. Flint accidentally blows out the power and has to head inside, where it's revealed he built the headquarters right outside his dad's house, and it's the coolest thing. I would pay $10,000 to have this in my backyard. I love how the doors in his headquarters are just curtains, but the actual way out of the house is a porta potty elevator controlled by what looks like a Simon. This guy is having the time of his life, and his dad wants to shut it down. This is one of my favorite deliveries in the movie.
The rappers, yes, they escaped and bred at a surprising rate, but I took care of that problem and disposed of them.
Billy, just play dead.
Flint.
Flint reluctantly takes his place in the tackle shop, letting up and helping his dad. You know, Tim Lockwood might be super unsupportive of his son and lets him know that so nonchalantly, and plays victim when Flint says he wishes he was more supportive. But the "and son" sign he added to the store is adorable. Baby Brent is the only celebrity Swallow Falls has, and he is stuck in his baby past. I love the coloring in this shot. The animation has this clay-like feel and texture to it that's so appealing to me. I don't remember Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs looking so stylistically pleasing, but it still really holds up. Tim decides to go to the town's unveiling event where Baby Brent is going. Spoilers, but I find it so funny that this man is willing to go to Baby Brent's big day, who is not his son, but later in this movie, Flint gets his own opening, and this man refuses to go. What a guy. The mayor is going insane trying to work with what he's got, trying to use the sardine overload as profit. Nobody is showing up. The audience is basically My Old Zoos and Zoo Tycoon. Flint uses this time to get the Flimsidifer up and running. We have our best character, Officer Earl. Might be one of the best animated characters ever written. He has this spite for Flint Lockwood, but at the same time, they're kind of best friends at this point. The pauses between his words, the way he says Flint Lockwood, his insane jumping, the love he has for his son makes him such a good side character. Then we got Sam Sparks, the weather girl sent to cover the event. She's basically female Flint Lockwood. She has so much enthusiasm for weather, but kind of sucks at the report. You got her assistant Manny, who just listens. As per usual, Flint's invention ends up malfunctioning and sends him flying with a scream straight from the core of Bill Hader's gut, therefore causing more mayhem to the town he's already been shunned in. This is such a fun sequence that starts proving how well this movie balances all the characters in a full scene. Everybody in this world gets a chance to shine. Background characters are hard to give much purpose to in animated movies, besides just standing around, and your mind eventually blocks them out and that's their purpose. But this movie fully takes the time to give little jokes and personalities to background characters. Every time you rewatch this movie, you will notice a different background character's reaction. This old man just casually fainting. This splash joke is kind of cliche, cliche in today's terms, but it still gets me. They even showed the reaction of this sardine, and they're fitting all of this in a 1 hour and 30-minute runtime, and yet the pacing still works. Nothing over or understays its welcome. Sam and Flint are a perfect duo, and this movie truly shines when they are in scenes together. The awkward, snappy delivery between them is so fun to watch. Flint changing his responses to appeal to Sam is great. There's so many personality traits of his that this movie expands on as it goes. He becomes less of an everyman character.
Love Jell-O.
I love Jell-O too. Oh, and peanut butter, right?
Oh, no, I'm severely allergic to peanuts.
Hey, me too.
With all this being said, this is around the time the movie's problems, although little, do start to surface. There's moments there's a bit too much over-explaining, and the choice of dialogue for certain scenes almost seems too easy. But that's only in parts when the movie's like, oh wait, we should probably mention this. And it rarely happens for anything else dialogue-wise. This movie would not be as iconic if it wasn't for this scene. The comedy of them all turning to luck, the facial expressions, the gorgeous cloud animation, it's so colorful. Flint basking in the feeling of his invention finally working gives me full body chills. The second this happens, the town and the mayor already want to exploit Flint and his invention. So this guy making animal hybrids and magical appearing hair juice wasn't enough to impress you all. He has to make food rain from the sky. A lot of the tension the movie builds on is this impending doom of the invention possibly hitting the danger zone, and it adds an approaching danger to the story instantly. The music in this movie is great. It adds to the spectacle feeling. You got sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows for the scene where everything is looking up for Flint. It fits spectacularly. I think animated movies need to have more 60s, 50s songs. It just makes any scene work better. Like, we need animated movies to throw in songs like Life Could Be a Dream or Mr. Sandman. This before and after shot is so creative. Again, I love this old man.
Falafel? Jelly bean!
Avocado!
Another conflict that arises besides the dangeometer this movie focuses on is this overflow of food. Instead of being bored with sardines, now the town is getting too much variety and are becoming greedy and ungrateful. Eventually, there's so much food that a lot of it just starts to pile up uneaten.
Leftovers? Not a problem with Flint Lockwood's latest invention, the out-of-sighter. So named because it catapults uneaten food out of sight. Therefore, out of mind.
And because the town no longer has to eat sardines, that leaves Tim's tackle shop to suffer business-wise. It's such a genius way to add more resistance to the dad and son dynamic. It almost starts to make you switch over to Tim's side, as now Flint is actually causing his dad personal problems. You would never expect a movie about meatballs would get this serious. The film adds so many interesting relationships and personalities to this otherwise very action, scenario-based concept. The best animated movies are the ones that can not only add a ton of fun, entertaining scenarios, but also keep in mind that for us to really care about those fun scenarios, you have to explore the characters enough to make those scenarios feel fully immersed. This movie makes you want to keep watching past just the spectacle and jokes, to see the character moments develop, because sure, the comedy in this movie stands out above a lot of animated movies, but that fact would have been forgotten if it hadn't also shined so well character and emotionally wise. The Lego Movie would be nothing to me without Emmett's emotional dialogue near the end, and this movie wouldn't be as special without the Flint and Tim storyline. Everything is just so perfectly mixed in both of these movies. It wouldn't be as special without Flint throwing ice cream snowballs at children, just absolutely pelting them, and the mom who then smiles after this. Another background character that only appears for 5 seconds, but you already know who she is. She's just happy to see her daughters having a fun time. Oh my god, no, not him. It's great to see Flint go from being this misunderstood, inventing weirdo to now the town's main source of joy. Even when the comedy does take a more on-the-nose, aimed towards children approach, it's still carried by the voice acting delivery.
I mean, look, even Steve is throwing chocolate snowballs. Oh.
The Jell-O scene has been stuck in my head for years. I have always dreamed of waking up in a Jell-O castle like this. The fact that he designed all of this specifically for Sam is so sweet. Her looking behind for an exit just in case is so funny. So many great bits and dialogue moments shine in this part. They find a way to insert a comedic response every other response, and it feels so natural. It does not get old. It just keeps on piling with more clever back and forth. I still quote the "but about you" line to this day. I love that line.
I've never met anyone like you, Flint Lockwood.
Me either. But about you.
I also remember this scene specifically for how it actually represents people with glasses and does the opposite of the OMG, this character looks so much better without glasses trope. Flint genuinely thinks her personality is represented through her glasses. He wants her to be her true self as she goes on about how she had to change herself to not be a nerd. But at the same time, she still is a weather reporter, so I think she's way past being a nerd. The more you think about it, this aspect of her character feels kind of contradictory, but we're gonna ignore that. More literal humor, yes please. This scene where she clearly sees Flint's face for the first time is incredible.
Really?
And on they go.
Whoa.
What?
Nothing.
The way Flint puts his hands over his eyes to then react to Sam with glasses, even though he already saw how she looked, is just, oh my god, this whole sequence is cinema. I feel like I'm running out of words to compliment this movie. Flint is becoming the celebrity of the town, and he's becoming a little too obsessed with this life. And through Tim's eyes, we see this town become kind of robotic and dystopian. This movie has a serious same face syndrome when it comes to background characters, but it works because they already feel like kind of puppets at this point, and I like that. But not my boy Joe Town. He is his own guy. He reappears throughout the film like that boy in Spider-Verse. You can never escape him. I would take a whole spin-off with Just Joe. Officer Earl for the rest of this film goes from being introduced as a very protective, uptight cop to then just a chill dad with his son, and there's so many wholesome moments with him and Calvin.
For my special angels, special day.
It's a great juxtaposition to what Flint's going through with his own father. I've said it a million times and I will say it again, Bill Hader was eating in the studio for this movie, literally.
Yeah, it's a big steak. I mean, every steak is not exactly the same size. Did you even hear what I just said?
Meanwhile, while this whole serious convo is happening, the state continues to rain on them, tying the serious moments back to comedy. Back in the lab, the dangeometer is starting to overload, and Flint's continuation of ignoring it is catching up to him. For some reason, the mayor is just hiding in here. It's so scary, he's no longer the tiny mayor he was. Only Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs could make a character becoming fat actually funny.
Everyone's in danger because of me!
A similar joke like this was in the Wonka movie, where the chief character, played by Keegan-Michael Key, was offered chocolates to take down Willy, but throughout the movie he slowly gets bigger and bigger. But the joke is so overly touched on and brought back up that it becomes less funny. That tends to be a problem with movies and a lot of animated movies. There's a difference between calling back to a joke and constantly trying to insert it in when you don't need to. This movie never does that. It lets a lot of things be silently funny. The mayor is gaslighting Flint, trying to make him believe he was always a star in his eyes, that he's always been like a son to him, as if he wasn't just also using Brent for money 3 days ago. This man invites the whole world to tour Swallow Falls, so that's just great. Imagine taking a trip to an island just for a natural disaster to happen there 5 minutes after arriving. This movie has the classic trope of main character being changed by success, ignoring any problems, becoming a bit egotistical. I do like this a lot though. It definitely continues to make Flint a more lesson to learn type character. He has yet to realize the balance of good and bad that comes with finally winning in his creative journey. And although I've seemed to touch up on anime and movie tropes a lot in this video as if it's negative, I never truly have a problem with any movie doing common story techniques, as long as it actually serves a purpose to the end result and works with the characters. Some movies can just mold it in better. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs accomplishes that. It takes this trope to such a realistic level. This movie explores the constant seeking of approval and attention from people you don't even know, and how it can become an obsession that never ends, an obsession you'll never win in. The Flimsdiviver finally reaches its point of no return, and we get this lasagna tornado. This scene is so cool. I don't know how Flint is moving like this. This is a truly moral character who actually immediately jumps into action to try and save the town, as he thinks this is all his fault and that he's almost too late. He's a very self-deprecating, his own biggest enemy character to some extent, and it's very relatable. In the lasagna tornado, we get kind of an homage to the tornado scene in The Wizard of Oz. Joe Town appears again, so optimistic. It truly feels like an early 2000s disaster flick in this part. We get an accurate portrayal of internet news.
Whoa, Sam, hey! We love a good storm over here, but you look like a nerd.
Patrick, several children are stranded.
The mayor is still in the lab. He's the one who actually caused this by ordering a buffet. Flint is such a laid-back guy, he's not even that mad. He's just curious what the guy ordered.
What exactly did you order?
A Vegas-style all-you-can-eat buffet?
Okay, now we're getting into the ending slash last act of this movie. The last act of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs is perfection. I cannot stress that enough. Phil Lord and Chris Miller might not know how to treat animators fairly, but God, they know how to make fantastic endings. Everything is wrapped up in a perfectly paced way. Everything great about this movie, story and comedy-wise, comes to the surface. All of the characters manage to have interesting little side plots and character developments as the disaster goes on. Officer Earl has to deal with Calvin's devastating food coma, and because of this, Manny gets his own moment. It's a joke in itself that this movie waits until the end to finally give Manny his due.
Is anyone here a doctor? Anyone?
I am a doctor.
You are?
I was, back in Guatemala. I came here for a better life.
This is around the time the movie also shows how much Tim actually cares for his son, despite having his judgments. I shed tears as he finds Flint to give him back his coat. Visually, such an appealing scene, but I can't help but picture crazy Dave from Plants vs. Zombies every time the dad is framed up like this. This knocks him out of his funk and he has his motivation back to save the town. Earl gives his iconic tough love to Flint. Baby Brent gets the biggest development in this movie as he no longer wants to live off of the fame he had as a baby, but wants to explore his true self. I love Andy Samberg, by the way. Anytime he's in a movie, I'm gonna like it. Flint loses the kill code to shut down the invention, leading to Tim getting another moment to be a great dad, as he has to go to the lab to email a file to Flint as a plan B. One of the funniest moments in this movie arises from this. I love seeing old people try to use technology. The cutaways back and forth as Tim tries to figure out the computer to the world falling apart around them is spectacular.
On the screen, there's a file marked kill code.
What?
Move that into my email window. Ha! Type in my name and press send.
Window?
Okay, Dad.
Earl goes into his next evolution. This man is carrying his son and wife on a peanut butter sandwich, jumping through Doritos, flying in midair. What a unit. Tim almost gets it, but it's too late as the lab is taken over by food. A really cool, kind of satisfying scene to me, timing-wise.
Dad, hurry!
Send. Oh, wait.
Brent does end up finding his truth during all of this. Chicken Brent might be the best character. The city sequences as the food spreads across the world has some of the most insane jokes. I just know they were having the time of their life writing this. Geniuses were in the writer's room. You get this romantic moment as Flint has to go down the peanut brittle hole, and Sam expresses her love while, not doing so well. The "but about you" line comes in again.
Me too. But about you.
Flint does survive this and destroys the invention in the coolest way ever, using the spray-on shoes. Oh my god, this movie. Everything it's established is all coming back. It's a puzzle that completes itself. Everything lands into place. The town is saved. The ratbirds carrying Flint being grateful for creating them is the best thing ever. I actually really do cry when Sam puts the monkey translator onto Tim to get Tim to say how he truly feels from the heart. Earl and Brent smiling so proudly.
Oh, for crying out loud.
I'm proud of you, Flint. I'm amazed that someone as ordinary as me could be the father of someone as extraordinary as you. You're talented,
I only recently found out that James Caan plays Tim, and it makes it so much sadder. It also makes so much sense. He truly is and was our movie father. He killed it at playing the tough, kind of mean dad who then realizes being a good, supportive father is really what he wants at the end of the day. They hug, and Sam and Flint kiss in the same way they were about to in the Jello earlier. 1000 out of 10. Animated movie endings and movie endings in general are the crucial part for if I end a movie liking it or not. All of my favorite animated movies would not be as favorable to me if it wasn't for how great they wrap everything up and make the viewing experience worth it. There's been a lot of recent animated movies that end so anticlimactically that I can't really decide if I like the movie or not because there's something that's missing. I'm not satisfied. The great ending makes all of the other amazing parts of this movie be more appreciated, including the main point of this video, which is the attention Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs did to making actual well-timed and well-delivered comedic moments that play on the craziness of the world so immersively. Other Sony Animation Pictures movies miss the mark and fall flat because they don't properly properly handle the balance of the character's jokes with the rest of the universe. The jokes don't feel as warranted, and they become more of a side offering. A lot of bad animated movies have in common the fact that they don't give the characters enough space to grow and establish themselves before making jokes, so it just becomes a never-ending try and miss, or they just greatly miss the mark on what people actually will find funny and entertaining. This movie, on the other hand, feels like it knows exactly the right time to throw in a joke. I want Bill Hader Sony, not James Corden. Okay, enough said about how great this movie is. It's time for the second one. Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs 2. A sequel that kind of gets skipped over when it comes to animated sequels just because it wasn't unwanted, nor was it wanted. It just kind of exists, and if it wasn't for this video, I would forget it existed. I think Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs is such a good standalone film that personally, I think the existence of the second one kind of fumbled the first movie's perception. For me, at least. Like, it would have been such a power move if they dropped Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and never ever talked about it again. It could have just been a one-hit wonder like all the other late 2000s 3D animated movies that came out. A lot of studios tend to forget that sometimes not having a sequel leaves a movie in a better position. It's more timeless to me, but Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2 does exist, and I'm talking about it. I rewatched it for this video, and I do have to say, I didn't despise it as much as I thought I did. I wrote the intro to this video like, yeah, I'm gonna go ham on the second movie, just to have a comparison on what makes the first movie work. But then I watched the second one, and I was like, yeah, this is not as bad as I remember. The characters have some great moments, especially Tim Lockwood and Earl. I like the continuation of Sam and Flint's relationship, but I do stand on how it cannot come close to the first movie because there's still a lot of problems this sequel has. It loses a lot of spark. The comedy from the first one is almost non-existent. Even if it still has some moments, it does give a vibe that the creativity of the first one kind of left. And to contradict that, there's almost too much creativity. If anything, there's too much in this movie that overwhelms and doesn't need to be there. Okay, quick disclaimer, comparing a sequel to an original or expecting it to be anywhere near the quality of it is unfair. I understand that. By design, a first movie most of the time will be inferior just because of its newness alone, but there's definitely been sequels that do come close. I'm only comparing these two movies in this video to kind of hone in on what the first movie did right in the humor payoff department. Okay, we're done with the disclaimer. All of the simpleness and towniness of the first one is wiped away for a more adventure-centered plot where Flint has to go back to the island and save it after it's now been taken over by food-animal hybrids created by the Flimsidifer. It's a common trope with sequels where the first movie is this introduction to the world and the rules of the story, and then in the second or third installment, they can now have some island, vacation, adventure. They can do whatever now, and this almost never works, because with animated movies specifically, it seems doing this makes it inevitable to have everything overshadow what we came for, which is the characters. I knew the second Disney announced Strange World that it wasn't going to work out, because when your story is solely based on the woe factor of a strange planet, you're forgetting that 10 minutes in, if you cannot find other exciting things, it's just a boring movie. At least Croods 2 realized this with its plot mostly focusing on the characters' new dynamics and the personal conflicts that form in this new island setting. Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs 2 lies in the middle. It still manages to make plot points that keep your interest beyond, look at these food monsters, so silly, but not to the extent it keeps the movie fully interesting. Don't get me wrong, there are still more food jokes than there should be. Like, how do you go from the first movie's brilliant callbacks and just the running of a cop character alone being funny, to then the second movie's prime humor revolving around food puns? The downgrade? I will make an exception for the leak in the boat joke. That was pretty good.
There's a leak in my boat.
The new characters aren't that fun to watch, and they make the movie really predictable, and that leads to a weird balance for the rest of the characters and their screen time. Chester V as a character and character design had so much potential, but they cannot utilize him. This man is obviously the villain, and the movie makes that clear the second he is introduced, which kind of sucks, even if that's intentional. He doesn't have much of a backstory or childhood trauma, nor was he mentioned to be Flint's hero ever in the the first movie. They just kind of made room for that. He seems like the easiest possible choice to have some sort of threat for the movie, and I get that I shouldn't have went into Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2, a movie about watermelon elephants and burger spiders, and expect Darth Vader, but I don't know, maybe I should! Maybe they should have put Darth Vader in this movie. Flint getting the LivCorp job happens so quickly that there's no real development for this to feel like a sequel. Most sequels tend to benefit with the added aspect of the characters being a little older and getting over the events of the first one, and then that's when a new problem arises that makes them have to bounce back to action. This movie doesn't do that. Chester V shows up not even 5 seconds after Sam and Flint kiss. There's no break between the events for the characters, and I understand that it's supposed to be a continuation directly after the events of the first one. That's the point of it, and that maybe makes this movie a little more interesting because it chooses to do that. But for me, the movie's story and pacing would have worked a tiny bit better if it had took a little bit more time to show the aftermath of the first movie's disaster and how the characters deal with what they're gonna do next before Chester V shows up. It would have gave us a little more time with the town characters and would have felt a little less overwhelming when this whole Flint's biggest inspiration does show up and gives him a job. The LivCorp setting sets this movie back pretty much off the bat because although on purpose the backgrounds are dull and there's not enough time used to explore the characters there as much as the first one did with its background characters, so I can't feel that immersed in their small screen time jokes, even if they aren't bad. It's the same problem with Ralph Breaks the Internet. When you put a character into this overly meta futuristic world, it makes the story less personal and the audience probably won't care about it as much. The world just becomes this exhausting reveal after reveal of interesting things, because that's all a setting like this can really offer, and that tends to be a huge separation of the comedy from the first. This movie relies so much more of its humor and comedy on the environment and the upcoming food hybrids than the characters' new lives and their own personal jokes. Even though I wouldn't say this movie totally misses with its gags, it rarely feels as clever or unexpected as the gags in the first. I still laughed quite a bit though because I'm not actually as picky as it seems. If I don't think too deeply about it, I will find anything funny. The first sequence with Flint in this new environment still has its high points. For starters, Steve has some great comedy bits, almost more than he did in the first one. I love him unintentionally starting beef with Chester V's orangutan, Barb. Voiced by Kristen Schaal, an icon. I will never get tired of her voice.
Monkey.
Ape.
Speaking of side characters, Joe Town was apparently going to be a bigger character in this movie, but the voice actor was busy with The Simpsons and couldn't do it, which is kind of confusing because you would think they would just get a different voice actor, because Will Forte, who voices Chester V, voiced Joe Town in the first one, so it wasn't like they didn't already replace that voice, but oh well, I won't question it. Maybe they just thought it was too much, especially when they already have to balance all these characters. I love Flint's reaction to milk and coffee.
Coffee and milk?
Despite my negativity, there is still some good that comes out of this new setting, even if it's not fully pushing into creativeness. From an animated sequel standpoint, it's not as bad as it could be, and this idea of giving Flint a higher role in inventing that he's dreamed of, but having more issues arise from that yet again to further push this lesson to learn character, works a lot. And Bill Hader puts his all into voice acting yet again. I also love the joke of Flint so obviously working for a company that's just stealing the inventor's ideas and being so oblivious to this. I wish the movie would have honed in more on the concept of how the company treats and uses the creatives. The inventor vesting ceremony where Steve accidentally clicks the celebration bomb is one of the highlights of this film. It captures Flint's embarrassment so well, and it's also just so colorful. There's some really nice color choices in this movie all around, and the animation is super bouncy, which is what I love about Sony animation movies. Sure, they can miss when it comes to plot, but god, they know how to push the animation to its full stretchy potential. Chester V's animation is so satisfying. He has that rubber hose Cuphead feel. Flint ends up getting put on a Swallow Falls mission by Chester V to find and stop the Flimsida fur, which is still active in creating animal hybrids. Chester V realizes how gullible Flint is and how much he would do for him. This is obviously a ploy to get Flint to find the invention and plug in the special USB, the BS USB, which would then give Chester the ability to have full control of it and use it to his own benefit for his food bar bar. He's doing all of this for a food bar, apparently. I'm gonna get into it more, but a big part of this movie is just how easy Flint is to being manipulated. Like, all of the characters pretty much get it figured out that Chester V is the bad guy, but Flint is still under this hero guise, which does work with his personality. Even though he's a likable character, because he's overly motivated, he does tend to fall into acting like a bad guy without even realizing it. It does get kind of stressful though, because Chester V not being a good person is literally in his face, and you want so badly for him to realize that. It's so frustrating that it does tend to get unbelievable, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The rest of the group ends up going along with Flint to Swallow Falls to look for the invention, despite Chester specifically not wanting anybody to know about it, and that backfires instantly. I love this cutaway gag. Sometimes this movie actually has the classic Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs comedy.
You mustn't tell anyone, not even your closest friends and family.
Sir, I won't tell a soul. Sam, I gotta tell you a secret!
I appreciate this movie bringing back the son and dad dynamic and not totally acting like it was wrapped up in a nice bow. They continue to keep it realistic. Tim has become a top supporter of Flint in this movie, which I love seeing. But despite this, Flint still decides to leave Tim behind on the boat during the expedition as he deems it's too dangerous for him. The sadness intruding from this man pains me. Before I get into the actual adventure story, I do have to give credit to how creative they went with this post-apocalyptic Swallow Falls, and they utilize and use this new atmosphere to add some really good gags. The designers went all out, shout out to them. Too bad the writers did not go as hard. There is a whole segment about cutting the cheese. How are you guys gonna dumb down Officer Earl, literally the funniest character in cinema like this? Seeing the characters' reactions as the past comes back to them is a nice way to give them their little moments. I wish I could say they keep this up. This is only the beginning of this movie, reducing a lot of them into one-liner characters the more we get into the mission. But thankfully, to make up for this, the movie decides to give you a lovable, marketable character, Barry the Strawberry, who is actually really likable. I will admit, it's hard to hate this little guy no matter how much I want to. I love Flint's hesitance towards him, his constant unwoos, and he's also kind of used as the driving motivation for Sam seeing the good in food monsters and thinking, hey, maybe we shouldn't kill them for no reason. I know I'm not a child, but I will always fall for little millennial humor characters. Speaking of little characters, we also get a side plot where Tim encounters little characters of his own, which are these evil pickles who have been consuming the taco shop sardines, keeping it in business. I love their character designs. They're so simple yet so scary. They have that Terrence and Phillip look, and I cannot express it enough when I say this is probably the best part of this movie. I really appreciate they gave Tim some time to shine. I could watch a full spin-off film of just Tim's adventures with these pickles. Seeing him become a father figure to these pickle triplets is so entertaining.
Hey, easy. Stop picking on your brother, will ya?
As much as I and most people complain about the overload of food puns this movie does, I will say I actually love a lot of the designs of the food animals. You can tell they had fun creating them, and it gives you something to be constantly looking at. One thing for sure is that the movie doesn't come close to being boring, which when it comes to sequels, that's a top priority. If you're not gonna try as hard meaning-wise, at least make it eye candy. The jokes that come with the food animals do give me a giggle or two. I think the problem that arises is the fact that the jokes are regurgitated more than they should be, and it starts to feel like they're throwing it in because they couldn't think of anything else for the characters to react to. What else is there really to offer in terms of filling the time after you already covered the characters' reactions to the apocalyptic Swallow Falls? This movie suffers from what a lot of island adventure movies like this do, which is repeating similar scenarios a couple times until it's time to actually progress to the goal. I wouldn't say this makes the movie or movies like this bad, because they are my go-to watches when it comes to road trips, but it does make the story's timeline jumbled in my head because there's so many parts that feel so similar and can be placed anywhere and not change much, and because of that, it makes my head not want to remember any of it at all. There are some plot points that feel really unnecessary and confusing when they don't have to be. For example, Chester doesn't want the group to let the world know about the Foodimals, and so as a solution, he wants to separate them from Flint. He also doesn't want the group to change or mess with Flint's mind when he does find the Flimsidifer. He knows Flint is way more gullible and willing to work with him than the rest of the characters, but it feels like he talks more about separating them than actually doing it for most of the runtime. There's so much talk and no action coming from this guy. guy. It just seems like the movie can't decide what it wants Chester V to do as a villain. Also, he spies on them with this drone thing that really makes me wonder why he didn't just use these to look for the invention if none of his own search parties worked out. Like, for being a bad guy, he's really lazy at being one. It just sucks that they introduce such a cool designed character, but do not spend any time having him fit into the plot properly. But I might be wrong on this, maybe I'm just a Chester V denier. I do really like the scene where they're both swinging from bully-proof underpants and they bond over being bullied. I thought that really helped expand on Flint being charmed by Chester, relating to him. Manny makes them all stew, which is foreshadowed in the underpants scene. I love Manny, by the way, such an underrated character. The way he says stew hits the right spots.
No one has ever rejected my stew.
Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2 takes a route similar to the first one when it comes to character disagreement and overall lesson. It has some really good messages about being a good friend and how supportive people around you matter beyond being successful or being a hero. This message arises from Flint paying almost zero attention to his friends in sake of blindly following Chester V. There's an interesting concept explored with Chester trying to convince Flint and put into his head that there's no forgiving bullies or people who don't believe in you, and that makes him question being friends with Brent despite him changing and becoming a part of the group. It's a creative way of exploring the cons of ego and the toxicity that comes with the me against the world mindset, and I wish, just like most parts of this movie, they explored it a tiny bit more. It feels like they set up a lot of new character dynamics, but because it also has to juggle all these other scenarios and make room for as many food puns as physically possible, it's not at the forefront as much as it could be. And therefore it makes those almost explored interesting topics not feel believable. However, I do love how Sam really isn't that mad at Flint, but genuinely wants him to learn. It always stresses me out when characters in anime and movies go instantly to abandoning the character that's messing up. She gives him a second chance, and I appreciate that character writing. It fits a lot with her personality and her unconditional support of Flint. But of course he just screws it all up even more.
Her opinion doesn't matter?
Of course it does. Yes, it matters, but just not right now.
Wrong answer.
Sam and the gang start to realize and put to the test their theory that maybe these food animals aren't evil, they just want to survive. And they were only attacking them because they were dressed as Chester's Thinkwanots. Barry apparently has a whole family that comes into the picture. I also find it really funny that the defining moment of the characters being for sure that Chester V is a villain comes when Manny flips the LiveCore logo to reveal it's evil backwards. Amazing writing, absolutely incredible.
The food creatures know something we do not.
Although nowhere near as strong as the first movie's last half, I do think the last act of this movie is really solid, and it's probably the strongest part of the story. It's a real part of this movie where it feels like it knows what it's trying to accomplish. All the characters are balanced a lot better. They tease us with some classic throwback jokes. We get an emotional segment as Flint comes to his own realization of the good in these creatures despite being tricked by Chester for so long. It had me smiling ear to ear seeing him cuddle up with these marshmallows. The colors of the crystals in the background. Although very late, Chester starts to do some actual real villain things showing that he never truly cared for Flint. This man has zero remorse here. Thank you for having him be a real villain and do something.
But you were my idol. My whole life I looked up to you.
I was just using you to get your invention.
Meanwhile, the rest of the characters are questioning Barb after being captured, convincing her that maybe Chester V doesn't care for her that much considering he calls her an ape, despite her being an orangutan. I cannot stand this character design. I don't know why. I feel uncomfortable. But I will say I do like her development in this movie. It's very cliche and expected, but it works. The Foodimals teaming up with Flint, despite Flint almost helping Chester obliterate them all, is really wholesome. It's revealed that he is actually Enwu, and he's basically their god. He literally has a cult in the palm of his hands right here. Barry starts to sound oddly like Eric Cartman. I cannot unhear it.
Just a man. A man who's made a lot of mistakes in the last couple of days.
The comedic timing of Flint being slingshotted by Tim like an Angry Bird into the LiveCore factory is a highlight for me. This guy does absolutely nothing to stop them.
We have a problem.
I get flashbacks during this part because my mind is reminded of the existence of another Sony animation movie. Barry gets a mech suit and absolutely destroys the Thinkwinauts. Then we get to the final battle where Flint has to go against Chester V once and for all. The holograms bit is really creative. Flint using the celebration bomb to get rid of them is also super smart. I feel like I've seen this before in another movie, but I don't know where. You get everything you want in this sequence. Flint saves his friends. Barb gets her own revenge on Chester and steals the flimsidifer from him. Chester V actually just dies, and Flint restores life to the Foodimals. Yay! That's not it though, because they top this all off with Flint fishing with his dad. Little things like this sets this movie apart from actual bad animated movie sequels. You can still tell it cares about giving importance to small things in this universe and keeping the characters pretty much the same. Sorry to bring up Ralph Breaks the Internet again. Enough has been said about the quality of that movie, but what makes that a bad sequel beyond just not being as good or entertaining as the first is that it actually changes the characters' personalities for no reason and makes likable characters no longer likable. Ralph is just creepy in this movie for some reason. What I'm getting at is that I'm thankful Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2 doesn't actually do any irreparable damage to the characters, but maybe I'm being too nice when I say that. Maybe I'm just in a good mood. The credits hit us with Cody Simpson's Lada D. I get so emotional when I hear this song. Anytime I think of the 2010s, my brain instantly thinks of We, Gangnam Style, and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. I can't come up with a proper conclusion to this video that truly shows my love for anime and movie comedy. It's such a hard thing to get right, but occasionally we get an animated movie that balances humor with the characters and emotional elements so well, and managed to appeal to all audiences. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs nailed it. It's the perfect mix of silliness with personalness. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what makes animated movies like this, as well as some of my other favorite animated movies, so funny. I'm not an animated movie comedy expert, but dialogue delivery and timing are definitely part of my liking of these movies. Sadly, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2 doesn't accomplish these timing and story elements, but it's interesting to compare the two and get a better understanding of where one can miss. Not only is the first one first, so it felt different, but its comedy is explored more through the characters' interactions with each other rather than the characters' interactions with the world around them. The characters need to be funny and enjoyable solely on their own before you introduce other elements for them to react to and get comedy from. That being said, sometimes a movie just strikes gold and hits the jackpot on what works. It's a right place at the right time type of thing. All the elements come together to belong. If Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs came out today, in my opinion, it would not be as appreciated. If Flint and Tim and all the other characters ended up looking any different than this, it would not be a classic, and I truly believe that. Okay, I need to stop. This video is probably going to be an hour long. I'm sorry, guys. Shorter videos will be back soon. I just talk way too much.